They're with Apexus, which is a 340B program, and they are both program managers with Apexus. And I'm going to let them do their special introduction. So let's welcome them.
Thank you, Fred. Hopefully this works. Can you guys hear me? Great, perfect. Hopefully you weren't listening to me breathe earlier. We're really excited to be here. Shamroz and I will do our introductions in a bit, but we are both pharmacy techs by background. So we work for Apexus now, which is the 340B prime vendor. So contracted by the government to help covered entities run their 340B programs with compliance. Who in the room is familiar with 340B at all? Oh, wow.
Oh, great.
Okay. Is that through like you working at a covered entity? What about a contract pharmacy? Perfect. Okay, great. So hopefully this won't bore you to death at 8:30 in the morning. We're going to talk about some stuff that hopefully touches not only what you do in your day-to-day, but also how it impacts the career of a pharmacy tech. So we can get to the next one. We're going to be focusing on self-audits and technician-led workflow enhancement. So, and as Fred mentioned, we'll do our little introduction ourselves. So my name is Nick Hufton, and I serve as a 340B education program manager with Apexus. Specifically, Shamroz and I work on the Advanced 340B Operations Certificate program. So if you've ever heard of 340B ACE, someone that has a 340B ACE credential, this is the program that allows them to get that certification, okay? Like I said, I started in retail pharmacy when I was 15. I got a work permit to run the register, make a minimum wage, and I thought it was the best thing ever. And then started working in the back a little bit, like that part a lot better. And then when I was in school, I worked at UNC hospitals as an inpatient technician. I moved my way into management, and now I'm with Apexus doing education. So I'll let Shamroz introduce herself as well.
Thanks, Nick. Can you guys hear me okay? Awesome. So similar to Nick, well, before my background, I'm Shamroz Sultan. I'm also the 340B Education Program Manager at Apexus on the Operations Certificate team. And similar to Nick, my journey in the pharmacy space also started as a pharmacy technician over on the retail side of pharmacy, after which I found myself moving into hospital pharmacy. And once I was at the hospital pharmacy, I had the opportunity to do different projects in different areas of the pharmacy. So started off with doing just little things like implementation of automated dispensing cabinets from Pyxis to Omnicell. After that, I moved on over into controlled substances with auditing and management of the controlled substance program for the hospital pharmacy. And then I found myself into the 340B space. And again, with 340B, I started with auditing and then eventually made myself up to a 340B program manager for the hospital. And after that, came to Apexus, where we're here with you guys today. And I'm super excited to talk to you guys about the 340B program and the self-auditing aspect of the program. So Nick is going to kind of get us started with talking about the series. This is a 3-part series. And then after that, I will come in to specifically talk about self-audit, and he'll wrap us up with the case study at the end.
Thank you. Yeah, so as Shamroz mentioned, this is the third part of our series. So I just wanted to highlight what we've covered so far, and then we'll kind of try to tie it all together before we jump in today. So in part one, we talked about inventory management. So inventory management, as you guys are probably very aware, is really important to 340B operations and compliance. So in that first webinar, we discussed the cornerstones of compliance, and we focused on the prevention of diversion and duplicate discounts. Are those terms familiar? Yeah, I see some head nods. Okay, cool. So diversion is the transferring of a 340B drug to an ineligible patient. And then a duplicate discount is when a Medicaid rebate is claimed on the same drug that was bought at a 340B discounted price. So those are the two main compliance cornerstones of the 340B program. And we talked about how purchasing and inventory management really affect those compliance cornerstones. And then in part two of our series, we discussed policies and procedures. So We examined how covered entities can establish and implement entity-specific policies that promote program integrity and ensure compliance. So by tailoring policies and procedures to unique operations, no covered entity is the same, no pharmacy is the same. But by tailoring that framework to their operations, organizations can better navigate those regulatory requirements. No, you're fine. Try that. And so this is kind of our goal for this series. We really want to try to make this point and we sprinkle some of this throughout, but pharmacy techs can be directly affected by and involved in 340B program operations, but it goes further than that. So by seeking advanced or specialization and leadership development or advanced training and education, trying to get involved with process improvement, really just seeking opportunities. The pharmacy tech career is expanding, right? And we're excited to say that opportunities are not dwindling, they are increasing. And one of our goals for this presentation is to show that there are a lot of opportunities for career advancement within 340B and by using 340B skills. If you want to move past 340B and do other things, that's an option as well. But I hope that one of the major takeaways is that the opportunities exist, and it's showing the initiative, developing the skill set, getting the experience that can really lead to advanced opportunities. So we'll do a quick just show of hands. Did anyone attend the first part of our series online? Cool. What about the second part? Awesome. So we're starting fresh with a lot of you, and that's fine. So we'll try to highlight some of the things that we talk about in today's presentation. We'll try to cover some of that stuff that you might not have seen in the first two presentations as well. So where are we going today? What do we want to talk about today? So we want to talk about self-auditing and the role that they play in ensuring adherence to 340B program compliance. We also want to discuss how the 340B program can be supported through technician-led initiatives like workflow enhancement and optimization. And then we want to review some unique technician skill sets that support really both the 340B program and pharmacy operations in general. So to kind of tie it all together, 340B compliance is really the combination of all three of these things. So pharmacy operations, which we kind of touched on in our first webinar with inventory management, policies and procedures, which is again, the institution tailoring those compliance cornerstones to their operations and their unique workflows, and then auditing and oversight, which is what we're going to talk about today. And so what we really want to drive home in today's presentation is that 340B compliance can't just focus on one aspect or the other. It's a really balanced alignment of multiple key areas. And I think that's where Shamroz is going to kick us off.
Yep. So now we're going to go ahead and transition into self-audits. So I know that Nick talked about the fact that at the heart of it all is program compliance. So let's step back for a minute. When we think of compliance, we think of audits, but really what are self-audits? So as the name suggests, self-audits are audits that you do yourself for your own program to ensure that everything is running as you expect it to run. And it's also an opportunity for you to identify any areas of non-compliance before it becomes a big issue. With that said, let's look at why we may want to consider doing self-audits for our program. So let's kind of start at the level of pharmacy, and then we'll dive in, or we'll take what we learned from pharmacy self-audits into 340B self-audits. So one of the reasons why somebody would want to ensure that they're doing pharmacy self-audits is to ensure that there's compliance with pharmacy operations. Another reason is that it provides us an opportunity to identify and correct any areas of concern that may lead to non-compliance. And it also helps us in continuously bringing efficiency to our pharmacy workflow. Ultimately, doing self-audits is going to help you keep your program in a state where an external audit can happen and that you would be able to succeed in that external audit opportunity. So it helps you keep your program in a ready to shine state. So we just talked about why we would want to self-audit, but what are some of the areas within the pharmacy that you would want to think about auditing? Or what are the areas of pharmacy that could be an opportunity where a non-compliance may be, there may be an instance of non-compliance that we're not thinking about? So one of the areas that you may want to consider for auditing is expiration date. So you want to ensure that all the drugs that you have in your pharmacy are within date, whether it's in your pharmacy or in the hospital shelves. Regulatory audits. So these audits, help us ensure all the pharmacy laws and regulations we're abiding by. So these would be like your controlled substance audits, your verification of records, appropriate storage of drugs, temperature checks, just to name a few. Another example of self-audit is reviewing your PAR versus usage. So this used to be one of my personal faves when I was over at the pharmacy, because this helps you ensure what you have in your shelves or in your automated dispensing cabinet is indeed what you're using. So, this would change seasonally or according to what is being used around the hospital. So you want to ensure your PAR is set to reflect the actual usage. So in some instances, you would increase that PAR, and in some instances, you would decrease that PAR. Decreasing that PAR would mean that you're not reordering the drug just for it to come sit on the shelf and it's actually being used. So that's an area that, you guys can bring a lot of value to your pharmacy by running these PAR versus usage report and helping with adjusting the PARs around the hospital and ensuring that what you're ordering is actually what's needed. All right, so now that we've talked about, self-audits in general, we've looked at different areas of the pharmacy, let's transition into 340B self-audits specifically. So similarly to how we talked about pharmacy self-audits, let's spend some time reviewing the significance of 340B self-audits. So what are some of those core reasons to why we would want to audit the 340B program? Well, first and foremost, it's accountability and oversight of the 340B program. The responsibility of compliance for the 340B program always is the entity's responsibility. So having self-audits would really help you make sure that you're checking that box. Again, it will help you identify and correct areas of opportunity before they become areas of non-compliance. It helps you strengthen your 340B program efficiency and helps with the operations of the 340B program. And similar to the pharmacy audit, it also helps you and your 340B team prepare for any of the audits, whether they're planned or surprised, like your external audits that should be happening annually if you have contract pharmacy, HRSA audits, manufacturer audits, to name a few. Here I'll pause and kind of draw back to that slide where we looked at the significance of pharmacy self-audits, and you guys will see a lot of parallel, and that's by design. It's to show you that the reason why we self-audit remains the same regardless of what area you're auditing, whether you're looking at just the pharmacy or whether you're looking at 340B program. But what you audit will change depending on what area you're focusing on. But remember, program compliance is at the heart of it all. All right. So similar to how we looked at different areas within the pharmacy that we would want to audit, let's spend some time now looking at different areas of the 340B program that you guys may want to consider auditing. So under eligibility, we may want to consider looking at the entity's eligibility to ensure that, that what helped us become 340B eligible is indeed still true on an annual basis. Another example of an eligibility audit is reviewing your 340B OPACE, which is like your database, to ensure all the listing on there is correct, because during a HRSA audit, that will be reviewed. And a good time to do that is during recertification, which happens annually. Under the inventory management area, there is audits you can do for purchasing, ordering, and invoice reconciliation to ensure that what you're ordering matches up with what you're receiving to what is being invoiced. You want to make sure that you are accumulating correctly, so you want to be able to review your NDCs. Under contract pharmacy, you want to ensure that you have pharmacy service agreements for all your contract pharmacy relationships as an entity. Diversion. So diversion, just overall is a big beast. So here, you would want to ensure that the patients you are serving are eligible patients of the entity. So here you can look at your patient eligibility, location eligibility, providers that are prescribing are providers of the entity, so provider eligibility, maintenance of the healthcare records where things are documented for your patients, your patient status, whether they were inpatient, outpatient, and just if you're a grantee, you would want to make sure that you're consistent with the scope of grant. Another area of the program that you want to consider is to make sure that you're preventing duplicate discount from happening. So reviewing your state Medicaid agencies, billing policies and requirements across that for all the different settings of your 340B program. And then lastly, any entity-specific considerations. So if you're a GPO prohibition hospital, if orphan drug exclusion applies to you, you would want to ensure all of that is being reviewed. All right, so we spent some time looking at the different audit activities, but it's also important to ensure that we're auditing these across all the different universes, or what we call 340B universes. So here's a slide outlining the different areas or the different settings where the 340B program is implemented for the hospital. So up at the top, the most outer layer, you'll see the 340B parent or the main site. So this is the main program site that's registered. The child sites are any of the associated sites of the parent site. Then you have your entity-owned pharmacies, which are like your retail pharmacies that the entity owned. And then you have any contract pharmacies that the entity chooses to have a contract pharmacy relationship with. All right. We'll pause now for a couple of quick knowledge checks. So just with a show of hands, if you guys can, and if we have anybody on virtually, you guys can go ahead and put it on the chat and I will find a way to pull that up. What central function ties together pharmacy operations, auditing, and policies and procedures? Raise your hand if you guys think it's duplicate discount, 340B program compliance. Okay, I see hands here. Prescription monitoring program. Okay, I see no's. Inventory management. Okay, so I saw most hands at 340B program compliance, and that is correct. At the heart of it all, just remember, it's the program compliance that brings all of these operations together and ties it all for us beautifully. We'll move on to our second knowledge check. Which stakeholder is responsible for compliance with 340B program requirements at the entity? Is it HRSA, manufacturers, covered entities? Great. Yep. Office of Pharmacy Affairs. Okay. You guys are following along. Great job. All right, now let's transition. We've looked at, self-audits and the different kinds of audits that we should consider, but let's spend some time looking at how frequently we should be doing these audits and, what that looks like. So just remember, when it comes to audit cadence, there's no right formula or prescription. Each entity's audit plans varies and is unique by your specific program needs. So as such, the entity will determine its own self-audit types and frequency of each of these audits. But we will go over some of the considerations and suggested cadence that we've seen worked for you guys to also consider. So annually, you may want to review your policies and procedures, making sure that everything you've documented in your 340B policies and procedures is indeed accurate. If there's been any changes, this would be a good time annually for you guys to update it. Reviewing, we talked about this a little bit, your 340B OPAs annually, and usually, I personally found that the window of recertification was the ideal time to make sure all the listing in the 340B OPAs matches the listings that you have to your eligible locations. And then your external audit. So external audit is the responsibility of the entity to have annually if you have contract pharmacy relationships. So just by design, that happens once a year. But external audits are also a great time for you guys to have a consultant come in and look at your 340B program and give you any input that is needed to enhance and optimize your program. For quarterly audits, you may want to consider looking at your credentialing file. So you would work with your credentialing office to look at the providers that are eligible for the entity and ensure that that file is updated and is being pushed over to your third-party administrators accordingly. Location mapping is something you might want to review quarterly. So usually this happens also in your TPAs, your third-party administrator software, where all your eligible locations are marked as eligible and the locations that you guys are considering ineligible are marked as ineligible. On a monthly cadence, you may want to consider looking at duplicate discounts, your TPA configurations to ensure that all of that is set at what you desire for them to be. And on a weekly basis, weekly/daily, I would say you want to keep an eye on your 340B claims, your ADT feeds, ERX files to make sure nothing is hung over. Everything is being communicated from your entity over onto your TPA as you wish for it to be. And when we talk about, all of these audits, just keep in mind that they can be randomized audits or they could be targeted audits. I would recommend doing both, right? So like you would want to target a certain percent of your 340B claims, but at the same time, you may want to do a randomized audit of like expensive drugs to make sure that everything is aligning as you want it to be, and you're looking at it from all lenses. All right, another key aspect of self-audits is to make sure that you have a pathway identified to reporting out your audit findings. And this pathway will also be in your favor to celebrate any wins that you have for your 340B program. So when you're auditing, it's important that you are taking your audit findings to your 340B operations team first, then escalating them to the leadership, and then giving a summary of that at a 340B oversight committee meeting. The 340B oversight committee is usually comprised of stakeholders from beyond pharmacy. So it includes like IT, legal, finance, hospital leadership. And it's really important for everybody in the scope of the 340B program and beyond to be aware that, you guys are putting in the effort to audit the program, and here's what you're finding. And it's not such that you're always going to have an instance of non-compliance to discuss, but it's still important to show that you guys are monitoring the program and that this is on your radar. And, like we've alluded to non-compliance a couple of times already in this presentation. And while you're auditing, it's inherently, you may come across an instance where you have identified some 340B non-compliance. And at that point, we'll talk about, what do you do when you identify 340B non-compliance, but just for you guys to be aware that there are different ways to detect 340B non-compliance. So it's through self-audits. When HRSA comes in and audits your 340B program, that's another opportunity. Manufacturer audit, and you're reviewing the normal day-to-day operations is another opportunity. All right. So really what happens if you are in a situation where you've detected an instance of non-compliance? First and foremost, you'd want to self-report. You would want to raise your hand and say, hey, there is an instance of non-compliance that let's look at our material breach threshold. So every entity that has the 340B program also has an opportunity to define what material breach threshold looks like for them and how that's calculated. So you would want to be able to pull up your policies and procedures, look at that definition of what material breach means to your entity, and see if the instance of non-compliance that you've identified is within or beyond the material breach threshold. And regardless of it being within or within the threshold or not, your intent should always be to work with manufacturers in good faith and say, we've had instance of non-compliance, we overaccumulated or we underaccumulated. This was the instance, and work with them in good faith to pay back or whatever is necessary and kind of close the loop on that. And documentation is going to be key here. All right, let's move on to our third knowledge check. An instance of 340B non-compliance can be discovered in your normal day-to-day operations. Is that true? Fantastic. I love it. You guys are following along.
One quick thing I'll add to what Shamroz said. When you hear non-compliance, it's really easy to think, no, like that's really bad.
Yeah.
But in 340B, you're going to find non-compliance. And having a good audit plan, like Shamroz said, and a way to report those findings and correct those issues shows a healthy program. Shows that you're paying attention to what's going on. You understand when problems arise and the pitfalls that, might come with it. So just view it from that perspective, that's part of a very healthy program. If you have someone that never finds anything wrong, that's probably more of a red flag.
Yep, absolutely agreed. Thanks for adding that, Nick.
Yeah.
All right, guys, so I'm going to wrap up this portion at least with telling you guys that there are several resources available to help each of you develop your self-audit plans, or if you have a great self-audit plans and if you're not aware, just want to bring attention to these templates that are out here that will help you enhance your audit activities. So if you go on the Apexus website, the 340bpvp.com, and look for the Resource Center, you'll be able to find these templates on policies and procedures that you can literally pull up and adapt to your own entity. It has, different pearls that you should consider adding into your policies and procedures, eligibility audits, diversion, GPO prohibition audits, duplicate discount, contract pharmacy, the list goes on. You'll also notice here with the tools that are available to you, there is best practices for your 340B Oversight Committee, how to develop and maintain that, what to report out on it. There's the HRSA 340B audit review, like a checklist available for you guys to review and kind of stay ahead. And then there's the independent audit request for proposal checklist. So this one, I know I personally enjoyed using it when I was over at the entity. It's essentially a list that helps you implement an RFP to decide who is going to be the consultant that will be the right match for your program to come in and audit your 340B program for you. All right, so we've talked about audits. I want to take a quick second and just, point out the different 340B roles. A lot of you guys are in pharmacy, so, you may see, especially if your entity has a 340B program, that there is 340B program manager who's managing the 340B program. There may be some analysts that are helping. There may be some auditors. The buyers are intimately involved with the 340B program when there is a 340B program at the entity because they're helping with a lot of the decision-making for the 340B program. So that's all within the pharmacy. Now, beyond the pharmacy in the IT space, there is, or someone, it may not be this role, but somebody who is well-versed in 340B, informatics manager, an analyst around that, an EHR specialist, and these would be the folks that, if you're seeing something's not accumulating right, something's not mapped correctly, these would be the folks you would reach out to. And then over on the finance side, the business manager or the revenue integrity specialist, they also lean in for the 340B program and help you track with some of the numbers of the program. But here, I think the key message here is for us to just understand that all of these roles and the stakeholders are not just limited to pharmacy, and that it's a collaboration outside of pharmacy to ensure that your 340B program is pristine and that you're running a very compliant ship. And now that we've talked through the self-auditing and different considerations for it, Nick will help us kind of bring it alive with a case study and tie a bow to everything that we've discussed so far.
Yeah, thank you, Shamroz. If you're lucky like me at my covered entity, I was everything in that green box you saw. So fun for that. I'm going to stand over here. Is that okay? I didn't realize that way my forehead's not in the middle of the screen. Okay. Apologize for that. All right. Like Shamroz said, we're going to tie everything together with a quick case study. Pharmacy loves case studies, so we had to do one. We can go ahead and get started if you want to click for me. So for this case study, we're going to say that there's a 340B auditor at a covered entity that's called CareMore Health, a 340B disproportionate share hospital. So they're a 340B covered entity, and they're conducting a audit for one of their contract pharmacies.
Judy wants to
More this way. Here, more this
Here,
way.
let me move on.
Oh, yeah. Okay, cool. Thank you. Judy's like, you need to scoot over. So thank you, Judy. Okay, so we're there's an auditor at a 340B covered entity, and they're trying to conduct an audit at one of their contract pharmacies. that provides 340B medications to the patients of that entity. So remember that the purpose of this audit will be to ensure compliance with 340B program requirements. So they're going to want to verify that medications are dispensed only to eligible patients, that everything was properly accumulated and replenished under 340B, and that everything was accurately tracked to prevent diversion and duplicate discounts. So the auditor begins their audit by reviewing the third-party administrator or the TPA software records for the Vital Dose Pharmacy location. And they're going to focus just on last month's 340B eligible dispenses. Like Shamroz mentioned, one of their monthly audits would be this contract pharmacy review. So for this review, this is really critical because the TPA system tracks and documents 340B accumulations and replenishments. And what I mean by that is in a virtual replenishment model, which is one of the ways to manage 340B compliance. As medications are dispensed in normal operations to patients that are eligible for the entity's 340B program, the software tracks it in real time and shows up as accumulation. So I like to tell people, think of the accumulator as a running tally just of dispenses as they come along. And once you reach enough eligible dispenses on a medication to reorder it, the institution can buy that drug at the 340B price, which is, a significantly discounted price. So the TPA is really the home of that. And as you order medication, so say you've accumulated 100 of one medication and it comes in a 50 count bottle, you buy one, the accumulator is going to minus 50 out. Okay. And you'll see this in the next slide. We'll talk a little bit more about it. But the key areas of review for this that the auditor will want to focus on is patient eligibility. So verifying that only patients eligible for this institution receive 340B medications as defined by HRSA guidance. That's going to be the diversion piece that Shamroz talked about. And then they also want to make sure that the prescriber that wrote the prescription is credentialed with the institution and that the location the drug was written out of is eligible. So it has to be from a registered site or from the parent, the health center itself. And so, and then the last thing that the auditor is going to want to pay attention to is accumulation and replenishment accuracy. So just making sure that what was dispensed is actually what accumulated and what was repurchased again. So as the auditor looks through the TPA software, they see a bunch of drugs, they see a bunch of dispenses. So he's going through, this first one for the patient albumin. Sorry, I had to throw in some hospital humor. So our first patient albumin gets this drug. We can see that there were 60 units dispensed, and then it comes in a bottle of 100 tablets. So there's not been a replenishment yet because we've not reached that full 100, right? So that looks okay, probably normal, like 2 months supply or something for that patient, or maybe 1 month if they take it twice a day, looks normal. For the next dose, looks like some sort of insulin, maybe it's a 4 ml vial for fill my script. You're welcome for my puns. And when looking at this record, it shows 1 unit dispensed, which would make sense if we're dispensing 1 vial, right? And then 1 unit was replenished, so it minused it back out. Everything seems to make sense. This is a really simplified version of what a TPA record might look like. It's also going to show you all of those eligibility requirements, if it checked all the boxes, if it didn't, why it calculated eligibility the way that it did. But I've just simplified it here for the inventory piece. So on this third one, though, the auditor notices something interesting. So on Cura Rash cream for Anita Phil, I know I worked really hard. So this is a 30-gram tube of medication, and on units dispensed, it shows that there were 30 units dispensed. I don't know about you, but that's a lot of cream. 30 different 30-gram tubes is a lot for one patient. And it looks like it was ordered that way too. So 30 were dispensed and 30 were replenished. So the auditor says, I'm going to focus on this script because something doesn't seem right. There's a red flag here. So he compares the dispensed amount from the TPA report to the invoiced amount from the purchasing software. So he goes in and says, was there really 30 tubes that we ordered? And he finds that there was. So the invoice shows that 30 tubes of cream were ordered for replenishment the day after this drug was dispensed to the patient. So the auditor now is just really curious about how this could have happened. Is this a special case where the patient needed 30 tubes at a time? Did the pharmacy even have 30 tubes on hand to give out? So he just decides to request a little bit more information and dig further. So he decides to reach out to the contract pharmacy, power to him, because getting them to respond sometimes is hard. But he calls and they work with him, which is ideal. That's the perfect scenario. So he asks them to check the prescription details. So they pull the prescription record and confirm the script was written for 130-gram tube. And that one tube was dispensed in the software. So now he's thinking, okay, so we had a prescription for one tube. How did it turn into 30 tubes, right? And so thinking through the process and what he knows about pharmacy operations, it has to be a billing system error, probably on order entry, right? Where quantity dispensed might have been mixed up with the size of the tube, right? So somehow the incorrect quantity was transmitted into the TPA software, leading to an accumulation of 30 units instead of one. That's an issue because we dispensed one, but we bought 30 on 340B. We have now over accumulated by 29 tubes, which if it's a really expensive medication, you can just, imagine the amount of dollars that could be in over replenished supply. So he knows that because the billing software feeds directly into the TPA system, it had to be a mistake in the initial claim data entry that cascaded through the 340B tracking process. Whoever entered the claim billing details for adjudication must have put the number of grams in the tube in the quantity section, not realizing it was asking for total units dispensed instead. That's what created our overaccumulation. That's also a problem for billing purposes too, right? If I bill for 30, I don't know how they got a payment. They probably would have got a kickback at some point, but they've now billed for 30, but actually only dispensed one. So that could be simplified to insurance fraud in a way, right? So now we'll do a quick knowledge check and then we'll get to the solution for this example. So true or false, a discrepancy between the amount of product accumulated and the actual amount of the product dispensed can pose a direct 340B compliance risk. True? Awesome. Okay. Thank you guys for staying awake. So you guys are absolutely correct. This can be true. So now what do we do with that, right? Now that he's found this compliance, he's identified it, he needs to assess the severity of the issue and determine appropriate corrective action. Like when Shamroz was talking, I mentioned that this is the normal part of the program. I can't tell you how many times I would notice something that was off and make a quick trip downstairs to our pharmacy and have a 30-minute powwow just to explain or educate or, really get them to understand how workflow affects 340B compliance, because it does. And so before taking further action, he has to determine whether this constitutes a material breach threshold or not. So like Shamroz mentioned, material breach is something the entity decides, and it's usually like a percentage of spend or percentage of total number of drugs purchased. But he runs the assessment and determines that it did not meet material breach. So what that means is that he does not have to report the instance to HRSA or to the contract pharmacies involved or to the manufacturers. That does not mean that the problem doesn't still have to be fixed, right? So because the material breach threshold was not met, just means they don't have to do that reporting to HRSA part. And they found out that this error was limited to a single prescription. It did not result in widespread diversion across the institution. So now he has to focus on how do we fix the problem and improve the process moving forward. There are a few different ways to correct this. The most common one is a credit and rebill. We ever heard that term? Yeah, all the time, right? Like in normal operations. So in a credit and rebill, depending on when the order was placed and when it was discovered, because that's the key, is a lot of times the contract pharmacy might say, well, it's been over 30 days, you can't reverse the claim out, like we can't fix the accumulations. So that's why, like Shamroz mentioned, it's important to do these on a monthly basis. I did monthly audits of all of my contract pharmacies because a lot of them had a 30-day window, and out of that, they're not going to change anything. So it's up to you to figure it out. So a credit and rebill is probably the most common way to fix these issues. And that's just where you reach out to the manufacturer and you say, hey, we bought 30 products on 340B, but we were only supposed to buy one. Can you credit and rebill the other 29 tubes to our non-340B account? That's the easiest thing to do. And most of the time, the wholesaler is going to cooperate because the other account is a higher price too. So they're okay with that. And that corrects the inventory discrepancy and does not retain improperly accumulated 340B medications. Let me pause really quick and just explain, why is having 29 tubes of cream purchased on 340B when you only dispense one really a compliance concern? Does anybody know? You can yell out at me. We don't have to. Yeah. Over accumulation. What can happen to those 29 products? They can expire, but they can also be dispensed to patients that are not eligible, right? Because you really only had one patient that was eligible and you replenish that one. So that can be bought on 340. 340B can only be purchased for eligible patients. So you can replenish the one, but the other 29, you're going to put in your inventory with everything else, and they're going to go to every patient, some which may be eligible, some which may not. That's where diversion comes in, because that would be the transferring of a 340B drug to a non-eligible patient, right? So credit and rebill is the easiest thing to do. I would also recommend checking the billing system, because something should have flagged. When you put in 30 units, you know, for a product like that, a topical product, it should have flagged it somewhere. And what we might find is that it did flag and they overrode it. That was a common problem with us, is we had flags in place, but my techs were so comfortable overriding them that a lot of times they didn't even look at them. So rechecking your billing system flags, and then also increase staff training and education. So maybe that tech just didn't know what quantity the system was asking for or what the normal practice is. Maybe they just needed more education. So training on proper unit of measure entry, understanding how those errors, so this conversation that we're having that with the technician team could be really important, because a lot of times 340B runs in the background and you don't even know that it's happening until someone goes to audit and they find something wrong. And so I set a cadence with our retail teams, because I didn't want the only time they saw me to be when something was messed up. So I would come just do quarterly education with them, ask them what their problems were, if there was anything I could help them with. Like maybe this is a result of they've got one person down there that's training people and that person was busy and they never, you know, that happens. So maybe I can then go back to my program director and say, how can we help them get staffing? So there was a way for me to help, you know, in every situation. So these are just some of the ways that you could correct this issue. But I hope this case study helps you see how self-auditing is key, and really the intersection of pharmacy operations, policies and procedures, and auditing, right? Because it was the pharmacy operation that happened that caused us to discover the non-compliance. The policies and procedures were checked to see if material breach was met, and then it was the auditing and the oversight that hopefully found and corrected the issue. So last knowledge check, what are potential outcomes of addressing issues identified during 340B self-audits? Strengthening overall program compliance, adjusting workflows, updating policies and procedures, or D, all of the above? Yes, D is correct. All right, what questions do you guys have? Yeah, go ahead. Mhm. A lot of times that's going to be documented in your policies and procedures. So however your entity, if your entity counts telehealth as credential providers and those doctors are on your credential list, then it just needs to be documented in your policies and procedures. That was a really common thing during COVID that came up especially. And now I think it's still lingering, but it's normal, like we've heard of that. So yeah, as long as it's documented and you have a way of, counting who's on that list and you're checking it. And sometimes on that credential provider list, if you're an educational facility, you'll have residents and all kinds of practitioners up there. So you just want to review it and decide as an institution, are we going to let every medical student count? Or are we going to only do, providers that have their credentialing and are not, a one-off pass? I think I saw another question. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Would be working with two different offices,
Yeah.
the credentialing office for the hospital, as well as like the School of Medicine. In my entity, I came from an academic facility and we had the decision of having all of the medical residents be part of our credentialing roster.
Yeah.
So we would marry the two and then that would be our credentialing roster for the 340 program. So that's just a consideration we want to think.
Yeah. Other question? Yeah.
On the website, you go to AAPT.
Thank you, Judy. Any other questions? Yeah.
Good question. I have never worked with an Apexus.
Yeah.
I was in retail pharmacy and then on a specialty pharmacy.
Yep.
So my question, I guess, just because I'm curious, when we have these kind of situations, like the case study that we went through, would that also be considered a be safe? Would that be documented in like the be safe documentation for an overage of medication being dispensed? And is it like a patient offense or?
It may not be documented in Be Safe because the right dose was actually given, right? It was just a system error. But there are cases where, like we've seen when I was working in the hospital, like Pyxis or Omnicell issues where they were grabbing more than one medication because the wrong strength was loaded. And so things like that affect patient care absolutely should be reported as well. HRSA, when we talk about material breach and what the government is looking for, if they audit 340B, it's about 340B compliance. So HRSA is not going to focus on patient care. They're going to look at, are you preventing diversion and duplicate discounts as the statute puts forward, right? Yeah. Great question. Yeah.
I've seen that a lot of companies are trying to eliminate how many contracts.
Yeah. Yep. You mean manufacturers? Yeah. Yeah, the 340B program is in a very interesting space. I will say, manufacturers are developing their own parameters around the program, and they're trying to define what covered entities can and cannot do. And the reason behind that, I think, is transparency, because manufacturers are extending discounts, but not necessarily getting the claim level details to show when duplicate discounts and things like that could be happening and when they're being double dipped, right? When they're extending a discount and then having a rebate collected, their profit is very slim, sometimes upside down. And so there's a lot of lawsuits about the manufacturer's imposition of restrictions on contract pharmacy. But you guys also too, some covered entities can have it's not uncommon to see a covered entity with upwards of 200 contract pharmacies. And like Shamroz said, it's compliance and auditing. And so if you have a team big enough to support that many, bless you, because we had 40 and I was a team of one and I was struggling. We had 40 contract pharmacies and I reviewed every single one of them every month. And I was the coordinator, analyst, man, like all of it in one. And some of these institutions do have the team to support that oversight. But as long as they're, having their program audited every year, they're really rigorous with their oversight, then, they could be stewarding the 200 well. But yeah, it's lawsuits happening every day because of those restrictions. So.